we have worked out on certain examples on the calculations of cost at initial measurement. Now, we are moving on to another dimension of the same area. Now, sometimes the examiner can set certain questions with some difficulties, not difficulties, I mean the examiner will try to test different areas, like say now we buy a land, for the purpose of constructing a theme park. You know what a theme park is? That is the ultimate purpose for which the land has been acquired. You construct a theme park, and that is the ultimate purpose of the asset. Then, till you commence your constructions, till you start your constructions of the theme park, maybe you are using the land for some other purpose. It does not mean that we have acquired the land for some other purpose. The purpose for which it was acquired is to use it for a theme park, but till you commence the constructions of the theme park, you will decide to rent out the property to an outside party to generate the rental income, but it does not mean that you can recognize it under investment property, not. So, say we paid 10 million rupees to buy the land, and that is the price you pay to the seller, and there can be some other expenses like brokerages, or we paid something to a broker, say it is 0.5 million rupees, and you paid stamp duties, and that was another 0.3 million, 300,000, and you paid land surveying cost and legal fees and so on and so forth. There were some incidental expenses like 0.6 million rupees. Altogether, we have incurred 12.4 million. 12.4 million for the property, but still we haven't commenced our constructions. And until such time you commence the constructions, we just thought of renting it out to another party for a temporary period. And for that purpose of renting income being generated from the land, we have incurred another say 2 million rupees to prepare it for that purpose. What do you mean? It is not the cost incurred to construct the theme park, no. Just to prepare this land to a rentable conditions, to prepare the asset to the rentable conditions, you need to incur another cost of 2 million rupees. Are we going to include that into the cost of the land? Obviously not. Also, are we going to deduct the rental income you generated from renting the property to another third party? Obviously not. So, that is another important and interesting area which I think sometimes the examiner can test at the exam. So, you need to be focused on that. What is the focus? The cost to be added or the cost to be included should be the cost incurred in bringing the asset to the intended level. What is the intended level? What is the level for which, or what is the purpose for which it was acquired? To start to use this property for a theme park, and that is the purpose for which the property was acquired. The cost incurred in preparing the asset to the intended use level is the cost to be added under LK 16 property, plant and those small nooks and corners are there which you will sometimes ignore, thinking that the examiner will not be interested in, but those are the areas which the examiner feel you will ignore will be the areas which the examiner will be interested in and will be the areas from which the questions will be set. So, you need to be careful, you can't just do selective learning, and you need to pay attention to all the areas of the standard to be successful in scoring all the marks from the questions. Then let me take you through the balance part, but not everything. Let us see how you decide the cost of property, plant and equipment acquired in an exchange transactions. What is an exchange transaction? It is a transaction where you give one asset and acquire another asset. You give one asset and acquire another asset. Exchange transaction. In other words, the value or the cost of the asset you acquire will be settled not in a cash payment, but by giving another asset. The considerations or the value of the asset you acquire will be settled by transferring another asset to the seller. Now, if you have the standard book, you can refer to the paragraphs I will be quoting. Cost measurement. If you look at paragraph number 24, mine is bit of an old standard book and you must be having a new version of it, and the paragraphs numbering will be sometimes different. This is measurement and the cost. How will you decide the cost of property, plant and equipment acquired in an exchange transaction? Exchange transaction. Now, LK 16 says, before you decide the cost of the asset acquired, you need to look into another requirement. What is the requirement? What do you mean by that? What is the requirement? Right before you decide the cost of property, plant and equipment you acquired, you need to look into a concept, or you need to look into another area. We call it the commercial substance of the transaction. Commercial substance of the transaction. Commercial substance of the transaction. I am pretty sure that overwhelming majority of the students who watch these videos would have heard of it before, would have learned it before, but let me do bit of an illustrations just to explain this profound concept of substance, commercial substance, which is repeated almost, not almost, which is repeated in some other standards like LK 40, and it is important to know this. Now, see, first and foremost, the conceptual framework says, for you to recognize an asset, make sure that has to be an economic resource which will contribute to a future cash inflow. Now, irrespective of whether it is property, plant and equipment, or investment properties, or intangible assets, or inventories, or so on and so, whatever it is, for anything to be an asset, what is the prime requirement in common? For all the assets in common, but the prime requirement, make sure that will contribute to a cash flow, that has to be an economic resource which will contribute to a cash flow in the future. Then, say we have asset A, this is already in the business, in the entity, and you think of acquiring asset B. The consideration of asset B that you acquire will be settled not in cash, but by giving asset A. Now, before you decide the cost of asset B for initial measurement, initial recognition, you need to first look at this concept of commercial substance. How do you check it? And it is an important concept. You need to look at the cash flows of asset A. Cash flows of asset A need to be compared with the cash flows of asset B. And if the cash flows of asset A will be exactly similar to the cash flows of asset B, this exchange transaction does not have a commercial substance. The standard says the exchange transaction lacks a commercial substance, and that does not create any changes or discrepancy in the future cash flows. It is only just that you physically do the exchange transaction, but that exchange transaction is of no use as far as the cash flows are concerned, because whether you keep asset A or whether you keep asset B does not make a difference in the future cash flows that the entity expects. But in going little deeper down into the concept of commercial substance, the standard says the cash flows of asset A and asset B should be compared in three configurations in terms of timing, amounts and risks. This is asset A, this is what we are going to give, and we are going to take over asset B, receive. The cash flows of asset A should be compared with those of asset B in terms of timing, in terms of amounts, in terms of risks. Now just imagine company A having, asset A having a remaining 5 years lifetime, and asset A will contribute to 1 million cash flow for a year. So the timing of the cash flows will be over 5 years time, the amounts of the cash flows will be 1 million rupees a year. And even asset B is having remaining 5 years lifetime, and even asset A will contribute to 1 million cash flow for a year. The timings of the cash flows are almost equal all in all. The amounts of the cash flows are also equal all in all. Let me not talk about risk in detail, because it is bit of a lengthy and deep discussions. Let me take a simple example. Now, the risk factor of the cash flows will be also dependent on the timing. Now, receiving 1 million rupee cash flows in 1 year's time will be less riskier than you receiving the same cash flow in 5 years' time. The later the cash flows are received, the higher the risk. The earlier the cash flows are received, the lower the risk. Since the timing of the cash flows are equal of A and B, even the risk factor can be considered to be similar. So as a result, asset A has a cash flow, a set of cash flows which are equal to the cash flows of the other asset which we are going to receive in terms of timing, in terms of amounts, in terms of risks. Now, does this exchange transaction have an impact on the future cash flows of the business? It does not have any impact. Now, suppose you have a lecturer and the existing lecturer will be replaced at the request of the students by a new lecturer, and both lecturers will look the same physically, both lecturers will use the same language, both lecturers will take the same profuse examples to illustrate the concepts, both lecturers will take the same durations, both lecturers will have the same voice and the tone, both lecturers will have the same way of delivery. So, there is no change at all, and if you start closing your ears and eyes and the ears, if you start listening to the same set of lectures at the same time simultaneously and you cannot identify whose voice is that, and then the replacement, this exchange of giving the existing lecture and receiving a new lecturer will make a difference, will make a difference and will make an impact in your education. So, will not make an impact in your education, so will not make an impact. Same thing happens here as well. The replacement of asset A by the new asset of B does not have any impact or does not have any change in the future cash flows of the business. So, then this exchange transaction does not have a commercial substance. Where the transaction does not have a commercial substance, you need not to do any changes in accounting. It is just a matter of you giving the existing asset and receiving the new asset, and that is it. So, you complete the exchange transactions physically without you incorporating any adjustments in your books of accounts. So, the requirement of incorporating the exchange transactions in books of accounts arises only when the transaction has the commercial substance. So, there has to be some difference in the future cash flows. Just let me take the same examples now. Asset A has only remaining 3 or 5 years lifetime, whereas asset B has 10 years lifetime. Asset A will contribute 1 million rupees over 5 years time. So, the maximum optimum cash flows to which A will contribute over the rest of the lifetime will be 5 million. Asset B generates 1 million rupees cash flows a year over 10 years time. So, the maximum cash flows to which asset B contributes will be 10 million rupees. So, the amounts of the cash flows are different. Timing of the cash flows will be different, and the risks of the cash flows will be different. Why? Receiving 5 million rupees just over 5 years time will be less riskier than you receiving 10 million rupees over 10 years time. The further the cash flows arise, the higher the risk. Just imagine you giving 1 million rupees to someone and collecting it right now, less risky. But you giving 1 million rupees and receiving that in 5 years time will be higher, will be riskier. Why? People get and forget. You have to give and forgive. So, as a result, you need to remember always the risk factor will be proportionate on timing as well. Now, coming back to our discussion, if the particular exchange transaction has a commercial substance, then only you need to look at the cost of the receiving asset. So, there is an order to follow. Since there is no cash payment involved, the cost of the receiving asset has to be based on the fair values. So, which fair value of which asset to be, fair value of which asset has to be prioritized? You need to give the priority to the fair value of the receiving asset. And if it is not available, the cost of the receiving asset should be the fair value of the given asset. If the fair value of neither of the asset can be decided reliably, then the cost of the receiving asset should be the carrying value of the given asset. So, that is how you decide the cost of property, plant and equipment for the purpose of initial measurement. Initial measurement should be the cost, and this is the fundamental understanding, but the examiner can set some creative questions. So, you need to be innovative and creative to use this knowledge in answering the question set by the examiner. So, that is what is required you being a chartered accountant to be. So, we can move on, and let me take you through another important area, recognition of subsequent expenses. Recognition of subsequent expenses. What do you mean by subsequent expenses? Now, you know, we discussed towards the early part of our video that initial measurement of property, plant and equipment should be the cost. The amount at which property, plant and equipment are debited to asset account should be the cost. Who recognizes, wherever you recognize, you need to comply with that requirement. How do you determine the cost? We explained that. If it is a separately purchased transaction, the cost you incur is added together to decide the total cost of property, plant and equipment. The cost to be added so should be the cost incurred until the asset is taken and prepared to the level intended by the management. After the asset was taken to the required level, after the asset was prepared to the level capable of operating as intended by the management, still the entity can keep incurring cost on the asset. Still the entity can keep incurring the cost on the asset, and that is what you mean by subsequent expenses. Now, sometimes you have heard of maintenance expenses, or some people used to call it repair expenses, whatever the name given. So, there has to be a common in accounting for subsequent expenses of property, plant and equipment. We have two accounting treatments. Either subsequent expenses can be recognized to profit and loss and can be expensed to profit and loss immediately as they are incurred. Or also there are instances and circumstances where subsequent expenses can be added to the carrying value of property, plant and equipment. In other words, simply if I put that into the language which you and I understand, repair cost, maintenance cost can be sometimes debited to profit and loss simply as expenditure, or there are instances where subsequent repair and maintenance expenses can be debited to the asset account itself. So, how do you draw a line separating and demarcating the expenses which are debited to profit and loss from the expenses which are to be added to the carrying value, which are to be debited to the asset account? That is what is important. Without by hearting, you need to understand this profound philosophy, and then only you can tackle any questions at the exam. And let me tell you, there is nothing to be hidden, so we can share our knowledge, and our success is you understanding the concepts. I wish all of you all who watch this video understand this philosophy. Now, initially say we paid 10 million rupees to buy the asset, and it would have been including payment to the suppliers, taxes, deductions of discounts, custom duties, transport, everything we discussed in the previous illustrations may be included there. So, the total is 10 million. You credited cash as and when each items of expenses were incurred and debited to property, plant and equipment account by 10 million rupees. The lifetime was estimated to be 10 years, and for a year we expect 5 million rupee cash flow. So, the total economic benefits of the cash flows we expect this asset to generate to the business over the rest of the lifetime or entire lifetime is 50 million rupees. First year has gone, so we recovered 5 million rupees. Second year has gone, we recovered 5 million rupees. Third year gone, we recovered 5 million rupees. Now, we are in the process, or we are now in the middle of the fourth year of the lifetime, fourth year. And you know, if you work without a break, that will result in breaking down, that will result a breakdown. But if you take a break and then work, that will result a breakthrough. Now, even this asset was in a continuous use from night to morning, from morning to night without a break, and that resulted a breakdown in the middle of the fourth year. The machine does not work, it got stuck, and we have spent couple of months now without being able to have our production. If the machine does not work and if you can't get the output, no business to the entity, no cash flows. Then can you make that 5 million rupee cash flow in the fourth year? No, it is going to be hell of a nightmare. Then we got down certain technical people and we got those people to bring this machine to the previous condition, previous level of efficiency, effectiveness. Now it started working, now only we regained our cash flow. We have spent about another 1 million rupees to repair the asset. Now, even by incurring 1 million rupees and repairing the asset and bring it back to the previous condition, it does not mean that we will get a more cash flow, no. Still we generate 5 million rupee cash flow. That is what you need to highly concentrate on. Maintenance expenditure does not mean that we incur expenses to maintain the physical look of the asset, physical appearance of the asset. Like you being girls, the audience, you sometimes will incur a lot of expenses just to maintain your physical appearances. You will go to the salon, get your eyebrows done, get your hair layered and get your hair colored, and you do a lot of things to maintain your physical look. But that is not what we mean here. Here, the maintenance expenditure is the maintenance of economic benefits. Here we got the first year cash flow 5 million, second year cash flow 5 million, third year 5 million, fourth year we would have missed 5 million cash flow unless you did that maintenance expenditure. By incurring 1 million rupees, what is happening? This 1 million cash, the expenditure in the fourth year will result in the asset contributing to the same level of cash flow, or this 1 million repair expenditure will contribute or will result in the asset contributing to a higher cash flow. This 1 million repair cost will result the asset in contributing to the same level of cash flow. In other words, this 1 million repair expenditure does not contribute to additional cash flows in excess of what we expected this asset to generate over the lifetime, but it will contribute to maintain the same level of cash flows over the rest of the lifetime. And that is why we call it a maintenance expenditure. By incurring the maintenance expenditure, we will get the asset to contribute to the same level of cash flows. We get the asset to maintain the same level of cash flows. Maintenance expenses mean we incur expenses on the asset so that the asset can contribute and maintain the same level of cash flows we originally expected. Then let me go to the same example, but subject to a slight change in my figures or in my story. We are in the middle of the 4th year, the machine still works, and we just thought of incurring another 1 million rupee expenditure on the asset and to upgrade it. You know, if you are participating in physical classes with the least amount of facilities and the comfort, and you are provided with the benches and the desks made of wood, and the lecturer does not even amplify the voice using some devices. So, the people who are seated at the back row, farthest row, will hardly hear the lecturer. And he does not use a marker pen, instead he is using some crayons and chalks. And it is not an air conditioned facility, it is just a hut covered with cajons. And just imagine you being in a situation like that. We are charging 3,000 bucks for a month. Then we thought of providing all the possible facilities to the students, to our customers. It is a carpeted floor with an air conditioned environment, and the room is now soundproof, and we are giving you stereotype 3D sound systems. So, no matter where you sit, and you can sit at the front row, or you can sit at the last row, farthest row, but still our voice will be reaching to all the extremes in the hall, and this voice is now evenly distributed. Then you are given, instead of the wooden chairs, wooden desks and the benches, we are giving you now cushioned chairs with the headrest and the armrest, and we are giving you comfortable chairs and the desks, tables now. One table each, and we will be providing some snacks during the break. So, you need not to bring your breakfast and lunch, it is hot, it is eatable. So, you can fully concentrate on your studies. We have upgraded your standard of learning now, now we are deciding to charge not just 3,000 bucks a month, and we are charging 30,000 rupees a month. So, our income increases following to the upgradation, and we can't afford to give the same service we can't afford to give you the standard service at just 3,000 bucks. So, we thought of increasing the fees. Now, the cost we incurred, say 1 million rupees to increase the comfort and the standard of learning environment, will contribute to maintain the same level of income, or will contribute to generate more income? Will contribute to generate more income, more cash flows. No longer is it a maintenance expenditure. Why? That 1 million upgradation cost of asset contributes not just to maintain the same level of cash flows, and that will contribute to generate more cash flows in excess of what we expected originally from the asset. And that particular cost incurred in the middle of the 4th year does not simply go to profit and loss merely as maintenance expenditure. It is an item of cost which has to be added to the carrying value of the asset, capitalized. Now, it is very simple. You need to question yourself, is it an expenditure that will result in the asset contributing to maintain the same level of cash flows we expected originally? Yes. Simply maintenance expenditure, bring it to profit and loss. Again, you need to keep questioning yourself, is it an expenditure that will result in the asset contributing to a bigger cash flow in excess what we expected from the asset originally? Yes, then it is not an expenditure just going to profit and loss. It has to be a capital natured expenditure. It has to go to the asset account itself, and that will get added to the carrying value of the asset. How do we justify that a subsequent expenditure will result in the asset contributing to an excess cash flow? There are different methods. If you can justify that the subsequent expenses will result in extension in lifetime. Extension in lifetime. In other words, that implies the fact that the subsequent expenses incurred will contribute to excess cash flows than what we expected from the asset originally. Or if the subsequent expenses will result in an improvement in efficiency, or if the subsequent expenses will result in an enhancement in the quality of output, or if the subsequent expenses will result in a reduction in the operating cost, those are all indicative of that the subsequent expenses do not just contribute to maintain the same level of economic benefits, and they will contribute to generate cash flows in excess of what were expected from the asset originally. And then let us move on to another important area, subsequent measurement of property, plant and equipment. Subsequent measurement of property, plant and equipment. Now, what was discussed before was the initial measurement, was not it? Yes. So, what are we going to discuss now? Subsequent measurement of property, plant and equipment. Isn't it the fact that you have got to decide the values of property, plant and equipment at different stages? What do you mean that? So, basically you need to decide at two phases. One, as you bring the asset to the books of accounts for the first time, you need to decide the value, and that is what we used to call the initial measurement of property, plant and equipment. So, what do you mean by the subsequent expenses or subsequent measurement rather? That is where you decide the value of property, plant and equipment for the purpose of presenting them in the balance sheet. And if you decide the value of property, plant and equipment for the purpose of bringing the asset for the first time into the books of accounts, we call them initial measurement. And if you decide the value of property, plant and equipment for the purpose of presenting them in the balance sheet, that is called the subsequent measurement. Here the subsequent measurement is on two concepts. In other words, for you to present the property, plant and equipment in the balance sheets, we can use two methods of valuations. First one is the cost model. Second one is the revaluation model. Cost model and the revaluation model. And you need to mind your language, especially in IFRS culture. We have our subculture, our parlance, our jargon. And this is understandable only for the people who live within this subculture. The others, outsiders, will not understand it. Now, cost and the cost model will be two different concepts. Revaluations and revaluation model will be two different concepts, and you would have never thought of it. The standards IASB or IFRSs, IASs or SLFRSs, LKSs never use the words just for the sake of using haphazardly, and every single word, every single comma in the standard impregnates a meaning. What do you mean by the cost model? And let me also give you and show you the difference between cost model and the cost. I want you to be able to discriminate and distinguish the cost model from the cost. Now, initially the cost of property, plant and equipment was 10 million. So, that was a simple transaction. You paid 10 million rupees and bought it. It is as simple as that. This is the cost. Price paid to acquire the asset. This is the cost. It is not the cost model. This is the cost. The value you decided for the initial measurement of property, plant and equipment is what you mean by the cost, the price paid to acquire the asset. So, what is cost model there? And if you estimated the lifetime to be 10 years and the straight line depreciation method, annual depreciation figure should be 1 million rupees, and if you deduct this 1 million rupee depreciation figure under the first year from the cost, and if the asset will be shown and presented in the balance sheet at 9 million rupees, this is the cost model. So, see how important it is. Sometimes the examiner will test it at the exam, asking you to differentiate the cost from the cost model, and if you just keep looking at the question without answering, the invigilator will walk up to you and say, time passes, will you? Cost model and the cost are two different concepts, and this is the cost. And if you show the asset in the balance sheet after deducting cumulative depreciations on the basis of the cost from the cost, that becomes the cost model. So, this cost model, two words will impregnate a deeper meaning. What do you mean by the cost model? That is the method of presenting property, plant and equipment in the balance sheet after deducting cumulative depreciation from the original cost of the asset. Revaluation model. What do you mean by the revaluation model? Once again, it is a method where the assets are shown in the balance sheet after deducting cumulative depreciation based on revaluation from the revalued amount of the asset. Revalued amount is 15 million rupees, cumulative depreciation figure based on revaluation is 3 million, deduct it from the revalued amount. So, the asset value on revaluation model should be 12 million rupees. Now, you have to make a choice. Now, in life, we have to make different choices. In fact, life is just 3 letters: in the alphabet. They are B, C and D. B is your birth, D is your death. So, you need to manage in between B and C, B and D rather. How do you manage between B and D? By C. What do you mean by C? Choices. And here again you need to make a choice to manage your life. You have to make a choice between cost model and the revaluation model, and it cannot be a choice just for the sake of choosing something, and you have to make a choice methodically. It has to be a methodical and scientific, appropriate, preferable and logical choice. If not, your financial statements will not reflect faithfully. What I am saying is, to make a long story short, you need to make a choice between cost model or revaluation model to show property, plant and equipment in the balance sheet, and it has to be a scientifically made, it has to be logically made, and you have to make the right choice appropriately, and let us see how we can make the right choice. Now, what will make you choose cost model, or how come, or what makes cost model preferable to revaluation model, or what makes revaluation model preferable to cost model? Just imagine you buying an asset at 10 million rupees. The market values hardly change, and this can be a property you acquired, and this property is located in a very remote area, and you get plenty of lands there, empty lands, and the market prices hardly change. The prices, the movements are not even just 1 single cent a year. And is it worth this land being revalued? No. And if the carrying value of the property or property, plant and equipment item is almost equal to the current market value, so the revaluation of the property or the item of property, plant and equipment is absolutely useless. So, here the cost model is preferable to revaluation model because the carrying value, what is shown, the value at which the asset is shown already in the balance sheet, is almost equal to the market value. So, why the hell are you going to revalue? So, why are we bothered to revalue? It is not important, that is absolutely useless. Cost model is preferable to revaluation model. But just imagine, market prices are highly volatile, and by the time you get up in the morning tomorrow, the market prices would have gone up, rocketing up, and the morning the market price was something, by the evening the market prices are something else. So volatile. So, what is temperamental is temperamental, you can't stop it from happening. Then you can't just stick to the cost model, why the cost model is something and the market prices are significantly different. And if the market prices are so volatile that make the revaluation is important and necessary, then you can't keep your mouth shut and wait, and you need to get up and roll your sleeves up and start revaluing the assets to show the assets not at the cost model but at the revaluation model. So, as a rule of thumb, what we simply remember is that revaluation model is important where market prices are changing rapidly, and the market prices are volatile, and the market prices are significantly different from the carrying values of the assets by now. So, that is what that will make the revaluation model preferable to cost. I think things are clear, and then you need to see how those two concepts are applied. And this is not just such a sophisticated philosophy, and I do not think you need to have such a detailed explanations on the cost model, but revaluation model has to. Why? Even LK16 gives lot of guidelines in applying revaluation model. So, it is my duty to explain so that you get to know that in detail. And when you apply revaluation model stick, you need to comply with two requirements. Remember, if you decide to apply the revaluation model, you can't apply selective revaluation. It has to be the collective revaluation instead, collective revaluation. Please hang on, I will explain this in detail. Second requirement is what? You need to do regular revaluations. Regular revaluations, there has to be a regularity. There has to be a regularity, kind of regularity. On what basis the regularity and the intervals of revaluation should be decided has to be explained in a little while. Let me first explain this and then come to the second one in this cascading order of explaining these two. Now, there are reasons why the standard prohibits you from doing selective revaluations. I will explain the reasons, and let me explain first one. Say an entity has acquired couple of lands A, B, C, D, E, F, G. We bought land A at 1 million, B at 2 million, C at 3 million, D at 4, E at 5, F at 6, and this is at 7 million. And those lands are located at different places. And in 1 year's time, market prices are quite different here. First one is 7 million, second one is 6 million, this is 4 million, this is 5 million, rather 5 million, this is 4 million, and this is 3 million, this is 2 million, this is 1 million. These were the original cost and these are the subsequent market prices of the properties on the reporting date. And this company has a chartered accountant and he was under severe pressure to increase the profitability. Just imagine for a moment we bring revaluation gains to profit and loss, which is not the case. Let me assume for the moment this is an instance where the revaluation gain can be taken to profit and loss. And this man was thinking days and weeks and months, keeping the hands on the head and the fingers in the mouth, how to increase the profitability. He was responsible for the profitability, not the CEO. Even the CEO has been putting the pressure on this guy, and then he thought, look, I should revalue property, plant and equipment, not the entire properties. I should revalue only the properties that will give me a profit. So he decided to revalue only the first, the second and the third. This is not giving any result. If you revalue the last 3 properties, that will give you a loss, not a profit. So the losses of the last 3 properties will mitigate the profit, nullify the profits of the first 3, then there is no impact on the profitability. So this man did not revalue the last 3 items, but revalued only the first 3. Why? Just with this ulterior motive of manipulating the profits and exploiting this revaluation model for the purpose of inflating the profits and to be popular with the superiors. Now imagine he applied the revaluation model not to faithfully represent not to faithfully present property, plant and equipment in the financial statements, but for the purpose of being popular with the superiors and to inflate profits, and that is what the revaluation model has been used for. And IASB, CA Sri Lanka, everybody knows, and there can be guys like this. So then they say no, you cannot do the selective revaluations. If you want to revalue a particular asset, you need to revalue the entire category and the class and the bunch of assets category to which that asset requiring the revaluations belongs to. Then whether you like or not, you need to revalue entire properties, the 7 items at a stretch, whether you like or not, you need to revalue. So that will result in both profits and losses being recognized to profit and loss alike. Now only we are faithfully presenting the properties in the balance sheet. If not, we are exploiting revaluation model just to hide our profits or to increase our profits and to manipulate our profitabilities. Just imagine the other way. So we have a massive profit. Somehow or other, by hook or by crook, I want to bring down the profit now. Once again, I am thinking from morning to night, night to morning, by keeping my hands on my head and the legs on my shoulders and the fingers in my mouth, thinking how to bring down these profitabilities. And that idea straight away drove into my mind, was driven straight away into my mind, what? I should revalue not all the properties, revalue only the last 3 properties. Why? It's the last 3 properties that will give me a loss. So I became active, started revaluing only the last properties to bring the losses into the books, and that is how I brought down my profits. I have achieved my objective by exploiting, misusing the accounting practice revaluation model, not to faithfully present my items or properties in the balance sheet, but to manipulate my profitability. So that is now known to everyone. Now that is what the standard says. No, if you want to revalue just 1 item is not possible, just 2 is not possible, and you need to revalue everything together at the same time. So if you have couple of properties, if you are in your business, revalue all the properties together. If you have, say, couple of buildings in the business, you need to revalue all the buildings together at the same, if you apply revaluation model. And if you have fleet of vehicles where there are 1000 items of vehicles in your fleet, you can't just revalue one vehicle, revalue all the 1000 items of vehicles at the same time. Furnitures, fittings, electrical equipment, office equipment, just 1 or 2 is not possible. Revalue everything together. You know the reasons now. So without studying and by hearting blindly, you need to understand this profound philosophy, and then only you can smartly tackle any questions at the exam. So that is my purpose. Now, the frequency of the revaluation. On what basis do we decide the frequency of the revaluations? That is also an important area. Nowhere does LK 16 say that you should revalue it annually or biannually or once in 2 years time, and so on and so forth. Nowhere does it specify. That is up to you all to decide. On what basis will you decide? It's like this. And if the market prices are changing once in a year, you should set your revaluation frequency policy annually. And if the market prices are changing once in 2 years time, you need to set your frequency of revaluations once in 2 years time. So if you see the market prices are changing monthly, might as well to revalue monthly. So that depends on how fast the market prices are changing, how slowly market prices are changing. that is completely based on the volatility of the market prices. That is important. Why do you think the standard requires a regular revaluation to be done? Why does the standard specify a regular revaluation? There are reasons. Just imagine we buying an asset at 5 million rupees on 1st January 10, and we set our accounting policy of revaluing properties annually. End of the first year, that became 6 million rupees, so we recognized a revaluation gain. And this entity has a bad habit of recognizing only the profits, and they try to avoid as much losses as possible. Losses as much as possible they try to avoid. Second year end, and there was kind of a recession in the economy and everything was down, and the market price has fallen down to 4 million rupees. If you revalue, you have to recognize a loss. Now, these guys hate losses, they want only the profits. They are only recognizing profit, not losses. They just kept quiet. End of the second year, they did not revalue. And again, end of the third year, the market prices kept deteriorating, and the prices are now have fallen down to absurd levels like 3 million rupees. Still they are keeping quiet. Then all of a sudden, end of how many years now? The fourth year, the market prices started rocketing up and started shooting right up straight all of a sudden. End of the fourth year, that became 10 million rupees, and these guys are now became so active, and they started revaluing property, plant and equipment again and recognizes profits. Now, if you complied with the requirements of LK 16 and did the regular revaluations, you would have recognized profits and losses equally alike. Now, what are you doing? You, without revaluing regularly, try to avoid losses and try to welcome and accept only profits. Once again, revaluation model under LK 16 is exploited, is misused not to faithfully present items in the balance sheets, but to inflate our profits, to hide our profits. If you need, you can do that, and to distort our financial statements, to manipulate everything. This is prohibited. If you want to revalue, you need to set the regularity, and if it is annual, do it annually, and you cannot do ad hoc basis the way you want. It has to be a policy. If you do it regularly, annually, biannually, or once in 2 years time, so what it has to be based on the volatility of the market prices, but it cannot be broken. You need to keep revaluing regularly based on your policy. That is a must. So, I hope you understood the concepts and the requirements, and that is very important, understanding the concepts, and then only you start being interested in the subjects. You just by heart, you hate the subject. You study the concepts and the philosophy profoundly, and then you start loving the subjects. What you do with love succeeds. Do what you love and love what you do, and then only it will start succeeding. We will move on. Here we go with the balance part of it. Now, the accounting for revaluation is not so hard, but let me explain that quickly. Accounting for revaluation And if you look at the standard book, the accounting part has been given in paragraph number 35, and that is again consisting of two paragraphs, paragraph A and paragraph B. Let me just go through those two paragraphs for you, and then we will straight away go to a small illustration. The gross carrying amount is adjusted in a manner that is consistent with the revaluations of the carrying amount of the asset. For an example, the gross carrying amount may be restated by reference to observable market data, or it may be restated proportionately to the change in the carrying amount. The accumulated depreciation at the date of the revaluation is adjusted to equal the difference between the gross carrying amount and the carrying amount of the asset after taking into account accumulated depreciation losses, or the accumulated depreciation is eliminated against the gross carrying amount of the asset. And you can read it as many times as you need, sometimes from the beginning to the end to the beginning, from the middle to both, but still it will be so blurred and not clear, because it is given in such a language which which does not, which is not understandable to everyone. So, you need to keep listening quietly. When the revaluation is done, two different accountings are given. So, based on the nature of the asset, we can make a choice of one, from these given two methods of accounting, we can make a choice and apply method of accounting for the revaluations appropriately. Now, let me illustrate. Say an entity purchased an asset at 5 million rupees, 5 million, and its lifetime was estimated to be 10 years. And then end of the 4th year, the market value was, the asset was revalued at the market value, which was 6 million rupees, 6 million rupees. And let us do the accounting for this revaluation. So, the facts are clear. It was 5 million rupees at the cost initially, and the estimated lifetime was 10 years, and we revalued it at 6 million rupees when the asset was 4 years old, and let us see how the accounting is done. The first method is very simple. This is what is commonly used everywhere. You would have done this even for your O levels or A levels, maybe 30-40 years back, and you can rejuvenate your memory and knowledge by listening to this. Let me open up the asset account and bring this cost of 5 million. Annual depreciation figure should be 500,000 rupees, if I am not mistaken. Yes, correct. We are at the end of the 4th year, so let us take cumulative depreciation. Cumulative depreciation, end of the 4th year should be 2 million rupees. 500,000 rupees into 4 years should be 2 million. So, that you have the carrying value in the asset account itself. What is the carrying value? Carrying value is 3 million. So, what did I say the revalued amount is? It is 6 million. So, you need to revalue it, right. Now, the standard says the second paragraph, paragraph B of 35 paragraph number 35 B part says, as of the date of the revaluation, cumulative depreciation figure should be eliminated, should be removed against the gross carrying value. What is the carrying value? What did I say? The carrying value was 3 million. So, this is the value after deducting cumulative depreciation. If the carrying value is after depreciations, what should be the gross carrying value? Gross carrying value should be before depreciation deduction. Cumulative depreciation figure on the date of the revaluation should be eliminated, should be removed against the gross carrying value, and the carrying value should be stated to the market value. For the carrying value to be stated to the market value, what do we need to do? You need to recognize 3 million rupees and we add it to the carrying value. The credit has to be taken to wherever that should be taken to. Let us see where the credit goes later. So, if you close up asset account, this is 8 million, balancing figure is 6 million, and this will be equal to the market value as of now. So, what did I say? Cumulative depreciation figure on the date of the revaluation should be removed, eliminated against the gross carrying value, and the carrying value on the revaluation date should be stated to the market value. So, that is the accounting under paragraph B of number 35, paragraph LKS 60. Second one is bit of a tricky one, and I want you to quietly listen and don't let it just to let me start afresh with the same facts and figures in the same question. Cost is 5 million, lifetime is estimated to be 10 years, and this is 4 years old when the asset was revalued at 6 million rupees. 6 million. Let me open up the asset account. Cumulative depreciation. Balance in the asset account is 5 million. Cumulative depreciation figure should be 2 million. Should be 2 million. Now, you know, asset is 4 years old. It is not a brand new asset. Asset is 4 years old. And if you were the buyer, what price would you pay to buy the asset? If you were the buyer today to buy this asset in the market, what price would you pay? You would pay 6 million rupees. So, you need to question yourself, I would pay 6 million rupees to buy a brand new asset, so I would pay 6 million rupees to buy a 4-year-old asset. I would pay 6 million rupees to buy not a brand new asset, but a 4-year-old asset. And this 6 million rupee is the price of an asset which can be used over 6 years time or which can be used over 10 years time. 10 years time is the lifetime of a brand new asset. This is not a brand new asset. 6 million is the price of an asset which can be used only over remaining 6 years time. Then based on this, market price of this 4-year-old asset, you can establish the market value of a brand new asset. If 6 million is paid for an asset which has just 6 years remaining lifetime, what should be the equivalent market price of a brand new asset that has 10 years lifetime? Simply, the market price of a brand new asset as of today should be 10 million. The asset is stated at 5 million cost, which is obsolete, which is outdated, and no longer can we show this asset at 5 million. This is sometimes back an outdated cost. You need to restate the asset at the revised current up to date cost of 10 million. To restate the asset at this current updated cost of 10 million, you need to add 5 million rupees more. Let us see, we will credit that to the revaluation reserve. We will explain that in a moment. Now the asset is no longer carried at historic outdated cost of 5 million, that is rejuvenated and restated at the current cost of 10 million. Then we have another issue. What is it? Whatever the depreciation we had in the depreciation account was based on the 5 million historic cost. Now the cost is revised. Once again, you need to revise the depreciation figure as well. What if you had paid 10 million rupees to buy the asset and started depreciating it at 10%? How much would have been cumulative depreciations in 4 years time? That would have been how much? 4 million rupees. So you not only restate the cost of the asset, also you need to restate the depreciation figure to make it equal to 4 million rupee based 4 million rupee depreciation based on revised cost. You need to add another 2 million rupees to depreciation. Credit cumulative depreciation by 2 million, debit where? Revaluation reserve. So either methods of accounting for revaluation give us the same answer, but you cannot use the methods of accounting for revaluations indiscriminately, and you need to make a choice of right way of accounting for the right asset, and that is how you make the choice. And let us move on to balance part of accounting for revaluations, and this part is important. Say property, plant and equipment asset account, we have an asset at 5 million. Let us say this is a property, a land. We will forget about depreciations for my convenience. and we revalued it at the market value of 6 million rupees, you debit it to property, plant and equipment account, and where do we credit? It has to be credited to an income account. Come on, does it become an income? Yes. How can I justify that? You need to go to the conceptual framework. How does the conceptual framework define and interpret income? Income is either an increase in assets or decrease in liabilities, which ultimately eventually increase equity of the entity. Now, doesn't this asset, by being revalued, increase equity? Yes. Equity is equal to net assets. An asset increase, there is an asset increase here, and eventually that will increase equity. Why? The higher the assets are, the higher the net assets are, and net assets is synonymous to equity. Equity increases. If you take the net assets value should be higher than 1 million rupees than what it was before the revaluation. So, this gain of 1 million rupees of revaluations appropriately fits into the definitions of income. So, you have got to recognize an income. Does it go to profit and loss? That is a different story. It does not go to profit and loss, but instead it goes where? It goes to other comprehensive income statement. Wherever it goes, it has to be an income. Then, now the asset value is 6 million rupees. Since this is a land, you need not to think of depreciation. And in the next year, second year end, we revalued again. Now the market prices are little bad. It's 4.5 or rather, it's 3.5 million rupees. 3.5. And this 1 million was taken to other comprehensive income, and that ended up in being in revaluation reserve account 1 million. Now, you need to reduce this asset value end of the second year from 6 million to 3.5 million. So, what should be the reduction? It is 2.5 million rupees. Now, this is like what? This is like an expenditure or a loss. But the loss is not 2.5 million. Come on, why not? Because last year, for the first revaluation, we recognized an increase in asset by 1 million. We bought the asset at 5 million rupees. The market value became 6 million rupees. So, we brought the asset up to 6 million rupees by 5 million, and we recognized an income of 1 million rupees, which was eventually taken to other comprehensive income, and then it started lying, that ended up lying at reserve account eventually. Now, what is happening at the second revaluation? That is dropping from 6 million rupees to 3.5 million rupees. Now, it falls below, it falls up to 5 million rupees, and this drop in market value from 6 million rupees to 5 million rupees cannot be an expenditure. Why? It is like you being where you were before the first revaluation. So, this particular amount or the distance from this point to where we were originally is not like you recognizing an expenditure, that is like you recognizing a reversal of the previously recognized income. So, then of this entire 2.5 million rupees, you should first debit 1 million rupees to revaluation reserve, and the balance only an expenditure genuinely as per the definition of the expenses in the conceptual framework. Why? Your fall in prices from 6 million rupees to 5 is like you recognizing an income and that income being reversed. And this is where you were, if not for the first revaluations, you would recognize only 2.5 million worth of revaluation loss in the second year. So, that is logical, that is what the standard says. And if you recognize revaluation gains, revaluation gains are taken to equity in the name of revaluation reserves, but if you recognize revaluation losses for the first time, they are simply straight away taken to profit and loss. Here, if you recognize a revaluation loss for the subsequent revaluation, you debit to profit and loss by the revaluation loss only to the extent that it does not reverse a previously recognized revaluation gain. And out of this 2.5 million rupees, I recognize the revaluation loss to the extent of the previously recognized gain. I debited profit and loss by 1.5 million rupees, that is the revaluation loss to the extent it does not reverse a previously recognized revaluation gain. So, that understanding is very important, and let me take the other way now. Property, plant and equipment account has a cost of 5 million, and at the end of the first year we revalued it up to 4 million rupees and we recognized the loss. This is credited to property, plant and equipment and debited to profit and loss. Why? Let me explain the reasons in terms of conceptual framework. How do you define expenditure or losses? Expenditure or losses can be either decrease of assets or increase of liabilities, which will eventually decrease your equity. Here the assets are reduced by 1 million rupees. The lower the assets values, the lower the net assets. Net assets are synonymous to equity, and that will appropriately fit into the definitions of expenditure in the conceptual framework. True. So, you should recognize this 1 million not as a reserve to profit and loss immediately. 1 million rupees. 1 million rupees. We bought it at 5 million rupees. Now, it was reduced down to 4 million rupees, and asset decrease has to be an expenditure. So, the assets carrying value end of the first year should be 4 million, and that is what you need to bring as the opening balance at the beginning of the second year. Regular revaluations requires you to revalue it periodically. I mean, we have a policy of revaluing annually. End of the second year, market price is now 7 million rupees. So, you should debit 3 million rupees to asset account to restate it at the current market value. Debited 3 million to asset, and let us see where the credit should go to. Normally, revaluation gains are recognized to equity in the name of revaluation reserve. But here you need to be little careful. Why? As the market price increases from 4 million to 7 million rupees, what is happening is, first and foremost, the expenditure we recognized in the first year is reversing now. So, the expenditure reversals never go to equity. Expenditure reversal should go to profit and loss. Make sure it does not go to credit side of the profit and loss. Also, it has to be a deduction from the debit side, or it has to be a deduction from the expenditure. So, this 3 million is first credited to profit and loss account to the extent that it reverses a previously recognized revaluation loss, and the balance 2 only can be credited to revaluation reserves. So, that is what the standard says. Revaluation reserves or revaluation gains are credited to equity only to the extent that it does not reverse a previously recognized revaluation loss. So, out of 3 million, you first credit 1 million rupees to profit and loss to reverse the previously recognized revaluation loss. The balance 2 million should only be credited to reserve, and the equity revaluation reserve is credited by the balance amount of 2 million rupees, and this part has to be clear. I am pretty sure the examiner can set a question from this area. It has been very popular with the examiner. If you see the past papers, very important. Then we are moving on to the balance part of LK 16, which is also very vital. What is it? Depreciation. What is depreciation? Let us look at the definitions in the standard. If you look at the definition of depreciations at the beginning of the standard, it is given: depreciation is the systematic allocations of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful lifetime. Very important definition, which has not been understood sometimes clearly. The way sometimes some people understand depreciation is not the way they would have understood depreciation. Depreciation should be the systematic allocation. That word is very important. That is like the be all and end all in the definitions. The key one, bread and butter in the definitions, the systematic allocation of the depreciable amount of an asset over its useful lifetime. What is really meant by depreciation? The depreciation is the process of you recognizing the drop in market value which is consistent to the passage of time. With the passage of time, the market value drops, and that is what you incorporate into the profit calculations in the name of depreciation. What do you mean by systematic allocation? Let me explain. That is the most important and the vital part in understanding the concept of depreciation there. Now, in your life, previously many times you would have heard of assets being depreciated using various methods and techniques. You would have heard of assets being depreciated using straight line method or reduce imbalance method or production unit method or production hours method. And on randomly, arbitrarily, you can't make a choice of depreciation. It has to be a methodical and systematic approach. Why? How can we make it methodical and systematic? Let me explain. Now, if you buy an asset at the cost of 5 million rupees, and if you decided that the lifetime is 10 years and this asset makes 5,000 units of output per year, we will assume the market price and the selling price of a unit remaining constant over 10 years lifetime. If the market price of 1 unit of output is 100 rupees, you generate 50 million cash flow for a year over the entire 10 years lifetime. So, that will contribute to a total cash flow of 500 million rupees. Now, these cash flows of entire 500 million will accrue and inflow to the business evenly over 10 years time or unevenly over 10 years time. It is evenly. Why? The cash flow from the asset to the entity is similar year on year. The cash flow from the asset to the entity in the second year should be equal to the cash flow in the first year, and the cash flow in the last year from the asset to the entity should be equal to all the cash flows over the previous 9 years cash flows, consistent, and that is evenly accrued over the 10 years lifetime. Now, as you select the depreciation method, your depreciation method should be consistent and should be similar, should be compatible to the pattern in which the asset contributes to a cash flow to the entity. And your depreciation method, let me put that in a different way, your depreciation method has to reflect the pattern in which the asset contributes or the asset generates a cash flow to the entity. And if your cash flow generation from the asset is consistently even over the entire lifetime, even your depreciation amount should be even over the entire lifetime of the asset. And if you recognize equal amount of depreciation of the asset, what does it say? What does it imply? You try to make the readers understand the fact that this asset contributes even and equal amount of cash flows to the business over the entire lifetime. So, you need to decide the depreciation method in a way that the pattern in which the asset contributes a cash flow to the entity will get reflected. So, that was the logic, and that is what is meant by the systematic allocation of depreciable method. And if somebody says, I have decided to apply straight line method of depreciation, what does it say? This asset is contributing, this asset is generating equal and even amount of cash flows to the asset over the lifetime. And if somebody says, we have decided to adopt reduce imbalance depreciation method, what does it imply? This asset is generating cash flows which is of a reducing and scaling down pattern to the business. So, that is what is very important to be understood. And depreciation method and useful lifetime should be reviewed at least annually. The more frequent the better. but at least annually. And if you get to know, if you feel that the revisions are required for the depreciation method and for the useful lifetime, you need to do the quick revisions to the depreciation method and to the useful lifetime, and the accounting should be based on LKS 8. Depreciation method being changed and the useful lifetime being revised should be considered to be the changes in the estimate, not as the changes of accounting policies. Then how do you decide the useful lifetime? In deciding the useful lifetime, you need to take some factors into account. So what are the factors to be taken into account in deciding the useful lifetime? And the list I am going to give you will not be the exhaustive list, and there can be some more factors to be taken into account. Say usage pattern need to be taken into account. Say for a small example, we buy an aircraft. The engine of the aircraft can be used only over 50,000 flying hours. Maximum anybody who uses this aircraft can fly only for 50,000 hours flying hours. The sky is so high, you and I can't fly, but this aircraft can fly only over 50,000 flying hours. If you decide to fly 10,000 hours a year, you can use it only over 5 years time. And if you decide to fly it only for 5,000 flying hours a year, you can use it over 10 years time. So how or what pattern you use it will decide for how long we can use it ahead. So the usage pattern will be critical in deciding the useful life of an asset. That has to be remembered, very important. You know, technological obsolescence technologies keep outdating. The best example will be the mobile on your palm. Maybe you bought it today at 200,000 rupees with the latest technology. Just imagine your previous mobile which you bought about 4 years back. And it's a shame on you to keep that outdated mobile, the mobile with that outdated technology now. It's embarrassing and humiliating. Even if the previous one is working as good as the first day you bought it, still just keeping the previous mobile with you is embarrassing. Why? It's outdated. You just thought of trashing that into the dustbin and going for the new mobile. Why? The new mobile has loads of new versions, new technologies, updates of the technologies, and that is what that will make you buy the new phone. Your televisions at home, or maybe your laptop computer. What makes you buy a new item, new device is not because it doesn't work, it still works perfectly, but the updations and the obsolescence of the technology. Now, the lifetime of a mobile or the lifetime of a asset like a computer is basically decided by taking the obsolescence into account. The technologies keep being revised, and that is what that has to be taken into account in deciding the useful lifetime of an asset like a computer. Or it can be subsequent nature of the subsequent maintenance expenses. The asset has been kept at continuous use and no one is damn care about its maintenance. From morning to night to morning, that keeps working at a stretch, no break, nothing. And normally it has a lifetime of 10 years, since you do not think of the maintenance, do not think of a break, you do not think of its repairing, it does not work for 5 years, it works only for 4 years time. So you need to do the regular maintenance, and that will perfect over 10 years optimum period of life if you take care of its maintenance and repairs on time. So that again will be a critical item to be taken into account in deciding the useful lifetime. Legal limits and restrictions, legal limits and restrictions. Say for an example, within the Sri Lankan context, if you buy a vehicle, legally you will be permitted to run the vehicle only for 300,000 kilometers. And whether you like or not, after 300,000, either you need to go for an overhaul repair of the engine or you need to buy a new vehicle. This is, I am just taking as an example, this 300,000 will be the maximum limit up to which you can run a vehicle, and it becomes, it becomes an asset which has to be trashed into the dustbins after 300,000 limit. So, there are legal limits and restrictions that will decide for how long an asset can be used. Now, there can be some more factors. I just taken 4 out of the entire, the lengthy list of factors to be taken into account in deciding the useful lifetime, and remember a few points, and that is important. Depreciation is something which is normally taken to profit and loss, but also sometimes depreciation is not an expenditure, and that can be an item to be added to the carrying value of an asset. Say for a small example, we are constructing a building, and for the purpose of constructing the building we will buy a crane. The depreciation of the crane will not be landing to profit and loss. Instead, you can include the depreciation into the carrying value and the cost of the construction. So, normally depreciation should be an expenditure in the profit and loss, but there are instances where depreciation can be added to the cost of items. It can be property, plant and equipment, it can be investment property, it can be sometimes inventories. Then when to start depreciating assets? Now say we bought an asset, 1st January 2019, we paid 10 million rupees to buy. Here, you can use it no problem. Now say this is a building and we are going to shift our administrative office to the new building, and you got the horoscope read. The astrologist advises you to do the shifting on 1st July 2019. So, the property you bought, the building you bought has been just idling over 6 months of the year, and you started using the building only on 1st July 2019. So, at the exam, the examiner can start testing this part, asking the point at which you should start depreciating this property. Is it 1st January 19 or 1st July 19? LKS 19, very mistake, LKS 16 has been very clear about it. You have to start depreciating from the date on which the asset became available for use, not from the date on which you started using the asset. So, when did this asset become available for use? That is on 1st January 2019. So, as a result, irrespective of whether you started using or not, you need to start depreciating property, plant and equipment item from the date on which the asset became available for use. Even for the first 6 months of the year 2019, during which the asset was idling, you need to start, you have to depreciate it over 6 months time starting from 1st January 2019. And then, when to stop depreciating? You can stop depreciating property, plant and equipment either when the asset is classified from non-current assets to held for sale assets, held for sale under SLFRS 5, or you can stop depreciating when no longer the asset generates a cash inflow to the business, whichever occurs first. And if you decide to sell the asset, and if the criteria are fulfilled to classify the asset under SLFRS 5, hereafter no longer can we depreciate the asset. Or if for some reason the assets stop generating cash flows, economic benefits into the business, once again you have to stop depreciating the asset thereafter. And if somebody says, I have incurred maintenance expenditure, maybe your employer or maybe your client place, you will encounter of this kind of a situation. The client place says, you guys know we have heavily incurred some maintenance expenses in the current year, so we do not want to depreciate. So, why should we depreciate? Because we have incurred heavy maintenance expenditure. So, that is because they are lacking the technical knowledge of LK 16. Remember, your repair expenses or maintenance expenses will not be a substitute for depreciation. You have to continue to depreciate the asset irrespective of your maintenance expenses and repair expenses. Now, say we are in the current year 2020 and we started depreciating for 2020. Now, on 1st July 2020, there was a labour strike, and this labour strike continued over 6 months time, right up to 31 December 2020. So, the machines, property, plant and equipment items were idling, so no productions, nothing, not even a single item. So, since the assets were idling, sometimes your client place might decide not to depreciate the assets for the second 6 months over which the assets were idling. No, even the assets were out of use temporarily, you need to continue to depreciate the assets, and that is the requirement of LK 16. So, we have covered almost everything of LK 16. That is the end of our discussions, and thanks for watching our videos of LK 16. Hope to see you once again with another important topic in the future.